Hello fellow ostriches, I figured I'd pick up on yesterday's meme for no reason at all. Speaking of yesterday and of 2 days ago, I promised you I'd work on a video and make a specific topic that I've been planning, and it's still not happening today. We're gonna do it tomorrow instead. I had some things coming up, still not enough time, so one day it's gonna happen. But today, we're also gonna have something interesting instead. Or at least I hope you find it interesting. Today we're gonna talk about my favorite god, but not in the sense as we did a few days ago with my favorite gods overall, or in the sense of the tier list. We're literally just gonna talk about my one favorite god, being Vamana, or Vaman, however you want to pronounce it, in jungle. We're gonna talk about how to play Vamana in jungle, what's strong about it, what his weaknesses are, how to build him, how to level him, and just create an overall effective playstyle for him. And as a common question of the day, I'd like to hear from you guys which unusual god pick in an unusual role is your favorite pick. And obviously also why. This is in a sense a continuation of the unusual picks series that I started a very long time ago and unfortunately never really continued. Because I guess Vamana jungle for most people still is something rather unusual. It's not the norm. Most people still see Vamana as a solo lane god even though he hasn't been ultra successful there in a very long time. And a little known fact here on the side is that Vamana has been played in the jungle for a very, very long time as well. There have been scrims around season 3 and probably even earlier where Vamana was frequently played or at least tried in the jungle. It just rarely ever made it into competitive broadcasted games. Now Vamana jungle is in many ways a strange pick. He doesn't really follow most of the logic that you apply to a jungle pick or what makes the jungle pick effective. His main kit outside of the ultimate brings limited CC, only a slow that is relatively hard to confirm, and a knock up that kind of requires you to either cancel the ability in order to deal more damage during the knock up, or just not be able to do anything else outside of that knock up to that particular target, so not much extra damage, and that's about it. It is worth noting that his 3 also has an attack speed slow for counter purposes. Yet in the sense of a normal ganking jungler, that usually isn't too much of a benefit. It doesn't set up any more damage for you. Junglers with such limitations in CC usually make up for it through other means, for example through a very strong teamfight ultimate with a lot of CC that can set up for teammates in a way or disrupt in a way. Vamana's ultimate doesn't quite do that. It's definitely a strong teamfight ultimate, but again, it's not really about the CC. Yet still, under the right circumstances, Vamana jungle works surprisingly well. So what are the benefits and the reasons to play him? Why do I like playing him so much? First of all, he is super flexible. He is pretty much the definition of a hybrid character that can do a little bit of everything, and that's something that reflects both in the playstyles that he can do as well as the build. You can have him as a secondary frontliner, you can have him as a hyper carry, you can have him as a counter build and pick to specific gods, and you can have him as anything in between. As such, you can also position yourself in the frontline, soak up a lot of damage, or you can position yourself towards the carries that you specifically want to counter, or you can just position yourself towards the enemy backline and just go for their squishies in general or those that don't have escapes. In fact, his flexibility goes so far that the only absolute core item, I would say, is Assassin's Blessing. Everything else after that is flexible depending on the situation, from boots to any defense or offense item in his build. There are ones that are better than others and some that are generally advisable in most games, but there's always an alternative choice that you can build instead under specific circumstances. His playstyle also offers him a lot more flexibility when it comes to defensive choices compared to other junglers. He can pretty much make use of any defensive item out there somehow, depending on the situation. Things look similar on the aggressive front. He has great synergy with a lot of items that you primarily build for basic attacks, but also with a lot of items that you primarily build for ability-based characters, because he can easily benefit from all of their passives, being a character that has multiple damaging abilities that he can use frequently, 3, and he also is very focused on basic attacks with his ultimate at the same time. In a sense, I would say Vamana in many situations is the better Kali at the moment, or baby Kali if you will. That may not make sense in the first moment when you hear it, but it kind of will explain itself. He is, much like Kali, A character that does decent ability damage early and has decent clear, actually better than Kali, and at the same time he's a character that transitions more and more into a late game carry through basic attacks in most situations. He also is somebody who very much relies on his ult for survivability, and while the survivability works differently, it's essentially a more safe Kali in my opinion. With Kali you have to ult at the right moment to survive. With Vamana you ult earlier and you'll probably survive longer unless the enemy team has stacked a high amount of anti-heal. But even then you still get some extra power and some extra protections which can help you do this carry job very effectively. Obviously this doesn't go for every matchup or every situation. Another benefit of Vamana jungle is that his 1 is extremely good for high rotation speed. This is along with him benefiting a lot from a lot of movement speed focused items anyways, but with the 1 being such a long range dash of kinds, you can really quickly rotate from camp to camp if you want to. He's a very strong counter to immobile guards, especially to immobile junglers as well, like for example Harbois, which he can chase down very easily, but also to guards that just rely on their CC. Think for example Artemis. If Vamana collapses on an Artemis and she ults, he can just counter ult if he predicts the ult right, and then she's pretty much out of options except for boxing him, and that normally doesn't go all too well for her depending on the build. Likewise, the ideal matchups for him are physical team comps with multiple basic attack focused guards. That way he can kind of most effectively use his build and his items and his passive together to get the most damage out. Though at the same time this can be a little bit dangerous too, because those are also the matchups that actually have a reasonable speed at which they can shred through him. Now for his weaknesses. Vamana is extremely hard countered by anti-heal. Protection reduction is also scary for him, but anti-heal is the worst, because if you have sufficient anti-heal, then he won't get his ult off properly, he won't get what he wants out of his ult, and that makes him a lot weaker. He's generally pretty mana hungry in early game, and also not the best god in early game overall. He just doesn't have, again, the best gank potential. His ult isn't the best on rank 1 until you finish some items for it to work better and all that stuff, so you gotta get to the mid game at least to be more effective. His engage is relatively bad, as long as you don't build blink, but blink on Vamana isn't always ideal. He doesn't have any leap, and when guards leap away from him, he has a hard time following up, especially if he used his 1 for the engage. At the same time, his 1 is very predictable, because you just charge right at the enemy, and it's relatively slow for any sort of engage. As such, you definitely want to have a sufficient frontline on your end. You can actually see this in one of the games where we only really have an Athena as a frontliner because our support is a Bellona that doesn't build tank at all or doesn't build support at all. That leads to Vamana absolutely not being able to do his job as a carry, because if the team or most of the team can focus on Vamana when he's doing his thing, when he's going into the enemy backline, then he's a very easy target. So you need sufficient disruption, sufficient spread of the enemies for him to really shine. If that's not there, he's probably one of the weaker picks. And again, he is very strong against hyper carries, but an overwhelming force of hyper carries is going to be too strong against him as well, because they can just put out so much damage against him very quickly, and he has to fully focus on counter building them only with Nemean, Lion and Thorns, and if that's not possible through other circumstances in the game, it's basically a death sentence for him. So what should you build on Vamana jungle? The first item is obvious, it should be Assassin's Blessing. After that, we're already in a flexible area. If you want to start the game off very aggressive, I would recommend going for Haste and Katana. Or if you want to start the game out a little bit more defensive and just generally OP at the moment, I would recommend going for Berserker's Shield. Again, Vamana always has these alternatives as well. You also could go for Gladiator's Shield if you want to go more ability based. You also could go for Frostborn Hammer, but I wouldn't do that at the start of the game if you want to replace Haste Katana instead. Then your next item should be your boots. I greatly prefer Ninja Tabi on Vamana over anything else for quite a few reasons. First of all, Ninja Tabi is the cheapest one and has the best value for money, with the extra mana added, with the extra power and the attack speed. It's just a little bit more bang for the buck, and as Vamana benefits from all these stats, there's no reason not to. Also, Ninja Tabai just allows him to branch out into other items more and not so much focus on attack speed and still get a decent amount of damage out of his ultimate, or basically get more basics off if the enemy is able to avoid one or two. Warrior Tabai is an option too for quicker clearing, but I really don't prefer it on Vamana. There's definitely the option to go into Reinforced Greaves as well if you find yourself going against a very high damage comp, or if you expect a lot of dots coming your way. Talaria I would generally advise against because he gets more movement speed from enough other items anyways that he benefits from, so it's usually not necessary. Around this time, if you for example have Berserker's Shield, Ninja Tabai and Hasten Katana, the next item that I like to build is Hide of the Urchin. Usually you will get a few kills throughout the game, and the extra defense plus health is just so effective on Vamana. There are other options for specific situations. If you for example have to counter a heavy physical or magical comp, then you should probably skip Hide of the Urchin. Another item that I generally like on Vamana that can be fit in at any point really is Masamune. With his ultimate he will be in the thick of the fight, he will have a lot of enemies around him, and as such he is the perfect contender for this passive and can make very great use of it as well as the other stats of the item. And speaking of that katana tree, we can almost build any item in this tree very effectively with the next patch. Maybe not the AoE one because he already has an AoE in his ultimate, but even Heartseeker, as long as it's still there, is pretty good on him. And the other one that I want to talk about though is Stonecutting Sword. Stonecutting Sword also good power, a lot of protection reduction against swishies, which he primarily focuses most of the time, and giving him extra protection that also translates into a little bit of extra power through his passive. This however works best when he is not getting focused too much by magical damage dealers. Another great item for him is Hide of the Nemean Lion. Just through the protections he gets 14 extra power and it makes it a lot more punishing for AA guards to attack him in his ultimate. Another great item that is similar here is Midgardian Mail. Now Midgardian Mail is kind of double nasty on Vamana because not only does it slow enemies down, but it also helps Vamana stick to enemies. In combination with Hasten Katana, it's kind of like the old Hasten Katana Frostborn combo, which is really not worth it anymore. But with Midgardian, which also has that double purpose of being a more defensive choice, it's a very good alternative against heavy physical AA comps. It really makes enemies consider if they should basic attack you in the first place or just keep on running. And then you have some more situational counters like Witchblade, which also have very good stats for Vamana. You have Executioner if you lead a lot more protection reduction if the enemy team is more tanky and you need to do that job too. Then you have the Crusher, which is just an overall great item for Vamana because it's so flexible between the bonus stats for abilities and basic attacks, which Vamana all benefits from. You have Talisman of Energy as my favorite magical defense item when you can opt into it, as it still gives him aggressive stats in specific situations that can help, but Shogun's Kusari can do the job too. And you have Spirit Robe more for when you get focused a lot, or Mantle of Discord to have some more safety in your ultimate through the disruption. And those are just my favorite items, but that doesn't nearly cover all the items that you could still build. You can still build the entire mace tree. You can even choose to go into Titan's Bane instead of the Executioner if you think you're gonna get some damage with abilities off that way. You can go into a Brawlers for more anti-heal, or you can just go more ability focused and even build the Jones. It's all possible in Vamana, and I think the hardest part is to adapt to everything going on in every single game, because you have to decide which ones you want to counter, and sometimes you can go wrong with that, as I did in one of these games. And this flexibility that Vamana has also expands to relics. A relic that's very good on him when you can fit it in somehow is Heavenly Wings, because if you use that before his ultimate, it's even easier to chase enemies down. At the same time, he also makes good use of beats in many situations, especially because his early, again, isn't the strongest and he can get focused out. He makes great use of any team relic as well though, so if you can get away without beats, you can for example get a shell for your team or any other team relic that can help out. But then again, he also benefits a lot from Blink because he doesn't have a natural engage that is very quick, and Blink compensates for that. And then there's also Thorns if you want to counter a heavy AA comp or any heavy damage comp that focuses you a lot, because Thorns plus your ultimate is just a very gross combo. In terms of ability leveling, the 3 is the highest damage on level 1. Then you either opt into the 1 if you already feel like you might need your escape, or the 2 if you want to secure quicker, then the one that you haven't used yet. And then you max out the ult, the 2, the 3 and the 1, or the 2, 3, ult and 1 if you really don't like using the ult that much. But then again, if you don't like using the ult, why are you playing Vamana? Due to the nature of his build and playstyle, with Vamana every game you play feels like a completely different game, unless you get hard countered by a ton of anti-heal, then they all feel bad. But that's what I think makes Vamana so great, and that's why I think you should probably try him out in the jungle. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button and move the bell, it really helps me out. And also, if you would like to gently caress that like button for me, I'd highly appreciate that. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.